Prince Handley coming to you with 100,000 watts of pure healing, miracle working love. I want to talk to you today about Session 2 on location of the third Jewish temple, the Ophel Mound. Let me give you a description of what we're going to cover today. In this session, we will discuss several items that reveal difference between the currently referred to area of Temple Mount and where the first and second temples, including the Roman rebuild of the Jewish temple on these locations, were actually located. Number one, we will discuss the size of the temple compared to the Dome of the Rock complex, in other words, the Roman fortress Antonia. Number two, eyewitness certifications of people that lived during the time of the temple, the location of the temple, and the destruction of the Jewish temple. And then number three, and most importantly, the location of the temple as certified by the Holy Scriptures. So let's talk about location of the third Jewish temple, the Ophel Mound. My friends, the construction of the third Jewish temple could start immediately if the Jewish leaders and the Jewish Temple Institute understood that the first and second Jewish temples were never located on the Dome of the Rock complex, or what's currently known as the Temple Mount, also known as Haram el-Sharif. This is part 2 in a series to develop a construct proving that the Jewish temple was not on the traditional location referred to as the Temple Mount, but it was in the city of David. In this message, we will develop the construct that the first and second Jewish temples were located on the Ophel Mound just to the north of the original Mount Zion on the southeast ridge. So let's mention briefly the background of Josephus, who lived in Jerusalem during the temple, during the destruction of the temple, and after the destruction of the temple. He was an eyewitness. So let's find out who he was. Titus Flavius Josephus, born with the name Yosef ben Mattiyahu, was a first-century Romano-Jewish historian and military leader, best known for his writings, The Jewish War. Josephus was born in Jerusalem, then part of Roman Judea, to a father of priestly descent and a mother who claimed royal ancestry. He was born in Jerusalem in the years 37 or 38 AD. He died AD 100 in Rome. He was a Jewish priest, a scholar, and a historian who wrote valuable works on the Jewish revolt during the time of 66 to 70 Christian era. And he wrote on earlier Jewish history. His major books are History of the Jewish War, 75 through 79, The Antiquities of the Jews in 93, and Against Apion. Josephus' works are the most thorough histories of the period that we have. Writings provide the greatest insight into what happened to the Jewish people during a 500-year period. Now, it's important to realize that Josephus lived in Jerusalem before the destruction, during the destruction, and after the destruction of the Second Temple. And text writings by Josephus mention that Herod stated dogmatically that his temple, though enlarged to double the size of the former temple, was still located in the same general area as the former temples, in other words, the first and second Jewish temple. The eyewitness account of Eleazar, who led the final contingent of Jewish resistance to the Romans at Masada, stated that the Roman fortress, which had long been in Jerusalem, was the only structure left by the year 73 Christian era. In other words, Messiah Yeshua, Jesus, was right. The Bible tells us, as Yeshua left the temple and was going away, his Talmudim came and called his attention to the buildings. But Yeshua answered them, "You see all these things? Yes, I tell you, they will be totally destroyed. Not a single stone will be left standing." You can read that scripture reference in Mattiyahu, or Matthew, chapter 24, verse 1 to 2, in the Brit Hadashah, or the Jewish New Testament. It's interesting to notice that the stones of the Roman fortress, Fort Antonio, were left standing where the Dome of the Rock complex, or Haram al-Sharif, is now located, referred to commonly as the Temple Mount area. The Dome of the Rock is built on top of the foundation stone, which is sacred to both Jews and Muslims. According to Jewish tradition, the stone is the navel of the earth, the place where creation began, and the site where Abraham was poised to sacrifice Isaac. The temple which existed in Jesus' day, and where the first temple was previously located, was not located on the area referred to now as the Temple Mount, or the Dome of the Rock complex, or Haram al-Sharif. Both the first and second temples were located on Ophel Mound over the area of the Gihon Spring. The Jewish people knew, up to the period that Islam emerged, even to the time of the Crusades, that the southeast ridge was the location of their Mount Zion, and the site of all the temples built in Jerusalem. Indeed, modern scholars realize that this is true for the real location of Mount Zion. However, these same scholars and religious leaders failed to place the Temple Mount at that Mount Zion on the southeast ridge where it obviously belongs. The Holy Scriptures clearly place the Temple Mount over and around the Gihon Spring on the southeast ridge on top of the original Mount Ophel, but scholars and religious leaders continue insisting and even dogmatically demanding that the temples of Solomon, Zerubbabel, and Herod were centered within the parameters of the Haram al-Sharif. Now, let me ask you an important question. Guess who wants to believe that the first and second Jewish temples were located on the current Dome of the Rock complex, or what is commonly referred to as the Temple Mount? Who do you think wants to believe that? Well, number one, the Temple Institute. It's been tradition since 1099 Christian era. Number two, Islam. Their belief that the Dome of the Rock is over Mount Moriah. And number three, Satan. If Israel and the Jews can now build the third temple in another area, not the commonly called Temple Mount area, but in an area where the first and second temples actually stood, that would speed up the return of Messiah and the judgment of Satan. So here are some other points to consider. The dimensions of the temple, with its unique shape and characteristics, could not be the same as Fort Antonio, where the current Temple Mount is located. The Haram al-Sharif, the current Dome of the Rock complex, referred to as the Temple Mount, also fits within the average size of a Roman camp, 50 acres, while the temple complex described by Josephus was only 9 acres, typical of other Roman Greco temple complexes of the period. By the way, if you have the Prince Handley app, in the show notes of the podcast, I give you a pictorial description of the location of the temple, the location of Fort Antonio, and the location of Gihon Spring, over which the temple was located. By the way, the size of the Fortress Antonio, based on Josephus and other evidence, showed that around 6,000 soldiers were housed there, plus 4,000 support personnel. It was like a small city with roads, bakeries, brothels, courtrooms, and barracks. Also, if, as some Temple Mount proponents argue, Fort Antonio was at some other location than the present Haram al-Sharif or Dome of the Rock complex, then why were not the Heronian stones from Fortress Antonia found together at another location? And why do both Josephus and Eleazar, who led the final contingent of Jewish resistance to the Romans at Masada, certify as eyewitnesses that the Roman fortress which had long been in Jerusalem was the only structure left after the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus and his forces? Josephus mentioned the utter ruin of the temple and all the city of Jerusalem, but he gave no reference that the Haram al-Sharif was ordered to be retained, or that Titus and his general staff commanded those walls should continue to remain intact. But they have survived unto our modern times. Through the centuries, those 10,000 stones have remained in their original positions, making up the four walls of the Haram, or the confines of the Roman fortress Antonio. and as a prominent and dominant architectural facility in the city of Jerusalem. So let's summarize, my friend. Tradition holds strongly that the current Temple Mount is the original location of the temples. However, the testimony of eyewitnesses who were at Jerusalem before, during, and after the destruction of Jerusalem certify otherwise. In addition, and certainly more importantly, is the prophecy of Yeshua. You see all these things? Yes, and I tell you they will be totally destroyed. Not a single stone will be left standing. My friend, the first and second temples of Solomon and Zerubbabel were located on the Ophel Mound just to the north of the original Mount Zion on the southeast ridge. We will investigate more concerning this in our following session. And I trust this teaching will add insight into the real location of the first and second Jewish temples, and where the third temple could and may be built. This has been your friend, Prince Handley, coming to you with 100,000 watts of pure, healing, miracle-working love. Baruch haba B'Shem Adonai.